I had been with Henderson and Associates for 15 years when they brought in the new CEO. Marcus Whitfield arrived with his MBA from Wharton and his reputation for modernizing outdated business practices. At 52, I had seen 3 different management changes, weathered 2 recessions with the company, and trained half the current staff. But apparently, none of that mattered anymore. The writing was on the wall from his first company meeting. "In today's competitive landscape," Marcus announced, adjusting his designer glasses while standing before a sleek presentation screen that hadn't been there the week before, "we can't afford to keep people around just because they've been here a long time. Performance metrics and innovation drive success, not tenure." His eyes seemed to linger on the older employees as he spoke, particularly those of us who remembered when handshake deals actually meant something. I felt my stomach drop as I noticed several of my younger colleagues nodding enthusiastically, already buying into his vision of a data-driven future. If you're watching this and relate to workplace struggles, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more workplace stories that might help you navigate your own challenges. I had started at Henderson and Associates right out of college, back when old Mr. Henderson himself still walked the halls every morning, greeting employees by name and asking about their families. Those were different times. We were like a family then, working late together on big proposals, celebrating contract wins with pizza parties in the conference room, covering for each other during personal crises. When my father passed away during my 3rd year, Mr. Henderson personally gave me 2 weeks off with full pay and told me family always came first. He even attended the funeral, standing quietly in the back with his hat in his hands, paying respects to a man he'd never met simply because he mattered to someone who worked for him. When I got divorced and needed to adjust my schedule for custody arrangements with my 8-year-old daughter Emma, they worked with me without question. Helen from HR sat down with me for over an hour, figuring out flex time arrangements that would let me pick Emma up from school twice a week and attend her soccer games on Saturdays. "We'll make it work, Patricia," she had said with genuine warmth. "Good employees are worth accommodating." When the company hit rough patches during the 2008 recession, I took pay cuts without complaint because I believed in what we were building together. We all did. Instead of laying people off, Mr. Henderson called an all-hands meeting and explained the situation honestly. "We're family here," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "Families stick together during tough times. If we all tighten our belts a little, we can weather this storm without losing anyone." And we did. For 8 months, the entire company operated on reduced salaries while we rebuilt our client base. When things turned around, Mr. Henderson made sure everyone received back pay with interest. But Mr. Henderson had retired 5 years ago, handing the reins to his son Paul, with a ceremony that felt more like a family transition than a corporate handover. Paul had grown up around the business, understanding both its values and its challenges. He maintained his father's approach for several years, but the board of directors had grown increasingly restless about quarterly performance and market share. The consulting industry was changing rapidly, with tech startups offering automated solutions and AI-driven analytics. After 3 years of steady but not spectacular growth, the board decided they needed fresh blood to compete in this new landscape. That fresh blood turned out to be Marcus, a 38-year-old hotshot who looked at spreadsheets where I saw people, who saw inefficiencies where I saw relationships, who spoke in acronyms like ROI, KPIs, and CRM, as if they were a foreign language we all needed to learn. His first week, he spent hours in closed-door meetings with department heads, armed with printed reports and colored charts that he'd apparently compiled before even starting the job. My department was client relations and business development, a role that had evolved organically over my 15 years with the company. I had started as a junior associate, handling filing and basic client communications. But as I demonstrated an aptitude for understanding client needs and building rapport, my responsibilities grew. I became the point person for our most important accounts, the one clients called when they had problems, the institutional memory that kept relationships strong, through personnel changes and market fluctuations. Over the years, I had built relationships with some of our biggest accounts that went far beyond typical vendor-client interactions. The Morrison Group had been with us for 8 years, starting as a small family business that had grown into a multi-million-dollar operation. I had been there through their expansion into 3 new markets, their acquisition of 2 competitors, and their transition from second-generation to third-generation leadership. Their current CFO, David Morrison III, had been a junior executive when we first started working together. I had watched him grow into his role, learned his communication style, understood his strategic thinking, and earned his trust through consistent performance during critical periods. Westfield Industries had an even longer history with us. Michael Westfield, their CEO, had inherited a struggling manufacturing company from his father and needed guidance on modernization and strategic planning. Over 6 years, I had helped them navigate regulatory changes, efficiency improvements, and a complex merger that tripled their revenue. Michael didn't just see me as a consultant. I was a trusted advisor who understood the emotional and practical challenges of running a family business while competing with corporate giants. These weren't just contracts to me. They were relationships built on years of reliability, understanding their businesses inside and out, and being available whenever they needed guidance. I knew that David Morrison preferred detailed written reports, but needed verbal confirmation of key decisions. I knew that Michael Westfield hated formal presentations, but loved brainstorming sessions over coffee in his cluttered office. I knew which executives at each company were decision makers, which ones needed to be kept informed for political reasons, and which ones would derail a project if their concerns weren't addressed early. But Marcus saw things differently. In his world, everything could be quantified, optimized, and automated. Relationships were data points. Client preferences were variables to be managed through algorithmic solutions. Personal knowledge was a liability because it couldn't be scaled or transferred efficiently. During our first department meeting under his leadership, he spread out charts and graphs like a general planning a campaign. The conference room table was covered with printouts showing client contact frequency, response times, resolution rates, and revenue per interaction. He had somehow managed to reduce 15 years of relationship building to colored bar charts and trend lines. "Patricia," he said, not even looking up from his laptop as he clicked through slides on the wall-mounted monitor. "I've been reviewing your client retention methods. Very traditional. We need to implement some dynamic outreach strategies, leverage social media engagement, and utilize data analytics to predict client needs before they even know they have them." I looked around the room at my colleagues, some of whom seemed as confused as I felt by this new vocabulary. Dynamic outreach strategies? I had been successfully maintaining client relationships for over a decade through what I considered fundamental business practices: listening, responding promptly, delivering on promises, and maintaining consistent communication. But Marcus made it sound like I was using stone tools in a digital age. "Most of our long-term clients prefer the personal touch," I explained carefully, trying to bridge the gap between his analytical approach and my experiential knowledge. "They call me directly when they have concerns, because they trust me to understand their specific needs and provide solutions that work for their particular situations." Marcus finally looked up from his screen, giving me a condescending smile that made my skin crawl. It was the kind of expression you might give a child who insisted on using crayons when everyone else had moved on to computers. "That's exactly the problem, Patricia. You've created a dependency model where clients are attached to you personally rather than to the company. What happens when you retire? What happens if you get sick? We need systems that transcend individual employees." I felt the sting of his words, but I tried to remain professional. The implication that my relationships were somehow problematic rather than valuable felt like a personal attack on everything I had worked to build. "These relationships took years to develop," I said, keeping my voice level despite my rising frustration. "The clients trust me because I've proven myself reliable through multiple challenges and changes in their businesses. That trust is what keeps them coming back, when they could easily go to competitors who might offer lower rates. Loyalty is a nice concept, Marcus replied, clicking through his presentation with the casual dismissal of someone who had never had to earn a client's trust through years of consistent performance, but it doesn't pay the bills. What pays the bills is efficiency, innovation, and staying ahead of market trends. Your methods worked 15 years ago, but this is a new world. That phrase echoed in my head for days. Loyalty doesn't pay. It felt like everything I had contributed to the company was being dismissed as outdated sentiment, as if the relationships that generated millions in revenue were somehow less valuable than theoretical efficiencies that existed only in PowerPoint presentations. But I tried to adapt. I was nothing if not a team player, and I genuinely wanted the company to succeed. I attended his mandatory training sessions on customer engagement platforms and predictive analytics, sitting through hours of presentations about software solutions that promised to revolutionize client relationships. I learned to use CRM systems that tracked every interaction, scheduling platforms that optimized meeting times based on algorithmic analysis, and communication tools that suggested responses based on keyword analysis of client messages. The new software systems seemed to create more work without improving results, adding layers of documentation and approval processes that slowed down what had previously been simple direct interactions. Where I used to be able to respond to a client email immediately with a quick answer or follow-up question, I now had to log the interaction, categorize the issue, update multiple database fields, and route responses through approval workflows that could take hours or even days. I smiled and nodded when Marcus brought in 20-something consultants who spoke in buzzwords and had never managed a real client crisis. Young professionals with impressive credentials who could build beautiful presentations about theoretical solutions, but had never sat across from a panicked CEO whose business was facing an existential threat. They were smart, energetic, and well-educated, but they lacked the intuitive understanding that comes from years of navigating complex human relationships under pressure. During one particularly frustrating team meeting, Marcus introduced our new consultant optimization protocol, which would standardize how we approached every client interaction. Each type of client issue would be addressed using predetermined response templates, specific timeframes for resolution, and measurable outcomes that could be tracked and reported. It was systematic, logical, and completely divorced from the reality of how business relationships actually worked. But what about situations that don't fit the templates? Asked Jennifer, one of our mid-level consultants who had been with the company for 7 years. What if a client has a unique problem that requires a creative solution? Marcus clicked to the next slide, which showed a flowchart with various decision trees and escalation procedures. That's what the escalation protocols are for. If an issue doesn't fit our standard categories, it gets elevated to senior management for review and customized response development. But our analysis shows that 87% of client issues fall into predictable categories that can be addressed efficiently through standardized approaches. I wanted to ask what happened to the other 13%, the complex problems that kept CEOs awake at night and required nuanced understanding of their specific business challenges. But I could see that Marcus had already moved on to the next topic, confident that his data had addressed all possible concerns. The real blow came 3 months later during the quarterly review. Marcus had scheduled individual meetings with each department head to discuss performance optimization and future trajectory. The phrase itself made me uncomfortable, as if my career was a manufacturing process that needed to be fine-tuned for maximum output. When my turn came, I sat across from him in the sterile conference room he'd converted into his office, complete with multiple monitors, a standing desk, and motivational posters about innovation and excellence that had replaced the family photos and company history that used to decorate the space. He was scrolling through data on his massive monitor, occasionally making notes on a tablet while I waited for him to acknowledge my presence. "Patricia, we need to talk about your numbers," he began without preamble, not bothering to look away from his screen. "Client acquisition is down 12% from last quarter, and your average interaction time has increased by 37%. We need to discuss efficiency improvements." I felt defensive but tried to keep my voice level. The Morrison account expanded their services by 30% this quarter, and Westfield just signed a 2-year extension worth more than any 3 new clients combined. The relationships we have are deepening, which generates more revenue and creates stronger client loyalty than constantly chasing new business. But that's reactive management, Marcus countered, finally turning to face me with the patient expression of someone explaining basic concepts to a slow student. We need proactive growth. I've been analyzing your client communication patterns, and you're spending too much time on relationship maintenance and not enough on expansion opportunities. Your call duration averages 43 minutes compared to the department average of 18 minutes. That's a significant efficiency gap. I stared at him, realizing that he had reduced my most valuable skill, the ability to understand and respond to complex client needs, into a negative statistic. Those longer conversations are why our clients stay with us for years instead of shopping around every contract period, I explained, trying to help him see the bigger picture. The Morrison Group told me last week that they've had 3 other firms pitch them with lower rates, but they're staying with us because they trust our track record and know they can count on personalized service when they need it. Marcus waved his hand dismissively, as if client loyalty was an inconvenient detail that interfered with more important metrics. Trust is fine, but it's not scalable. I need you to focus on the metrics that matter: new client acquisition, upselling existing contracts, and reducing the time spent on what you call relationship maintenance. We have systems for that now. Systems? I asked, genuinely confused about how software could replace the intuitive understanding that came from years of working with specific clients. He clicked through several screens, showing me charts and graphs that supposedly demonstrated the superiority of automated relationship management. Our new CRM system tracks client interaction patterns and sends automated follow-ups based on predictive algorithms. It can identify upselling opportunities, schedule regular check-ins, and even suggest conversation topics based on the client's industry and previous interactions. It's much more efficient than relying on individual memory and personal relationships. I stared at him, realizing that everything I valued about my work was being categorized as inefficiency. Marcus, with respect, these relationships are the foundation of our business. The Morrison Group alone represents 18% of our annual revenue. They stay with us because they know I understand their specific challenges and can provide solutions that work for their unique situation. Exactly my point, he said, leaning back in his chair with the satisfied expression of someone who had just proven their argument. We're too dependent on legacy clients and individual relationships. That's a vulnerability, not a strength. I need you to diversify our portfolio and modernize your approach. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Marcus laying out new targets and protocols that felt designed to strip away everything I had built over 15 years. He wanted me to reduce average call times by 40%, increase new client contacts by 60%, and implement standardized service delivery protocols that would minimize the impact of personnel changes on client relationships. As I left his office, I felt like I was mourning the death of everything I'd worked for. Walking back to my desk, I passed the photo wall that still displayed pictures from company events over the years: holiday parties, client appreciation dinners, retirement celebrations. In many of those photos, I was standing next to clients who had become more than business contacts. They were people whose successes I had celebrated and whose challenges I had helped them overcome. Things got worse over the following weeks. Marcus implemented a new system where all client communications had to be logged and tracked through his monitoring software. Every phone call required a summary report with specific action items and measurable outcomes. Every email had to be categorized by type, urgency, and expected resolution timeframe. Every lunch meeting needed pre-approval with documented objectives and post-meeting assessment reports. The spontaneous check-ins I used to do with clients, the casual conversations that often revealed their real concerns, were now seen as inefficient use of billable hours. When David Morrison called me on a Friday afternoon just to talk through some concerns about a potential acquisition, I found myself watching the clock and trying to steer the conversation toward measurable outcomes rather than simply listening and providing the guidance he needed. The documentation requirements were overwhelming. I was spending more time writing reports about client interactions than actually interacting with clients. Simple phone calls that used to take 20 minutes now required an additional 15 minutes of data entry and classification. The system was supposed to make us more efficient, but it was actually slowing everything down while creating barriers between consultants and the people we were supposed to be helping. Marcus also brought in a new employee, Jessica Chen, fresh from business school with a specialty in digital client engagement. She was 26, brilliant with technology, and full of ideas about automating everything from initial contact to follow-up surveys. She could build impressive presentations, create detailed analytical reports, and navigate our new software systems with ease. Marcus clearly saw her as the future, while I was increasingly treated as a relic from the past who needed to be managed and gradually phased out. Jessica was enthusiastic and well-meaning, but she approached every client interaction like a case study from business school. She had theories about optimal communication strategies and best practices for relationship management, but she had never sat across from a client whose business was failing and who needed honest guidance about difficult decisions. She could quote statistics about client satisfaction and retention rates, but she had never earned someone's trust through years of consistent performance during crisis situations. The generational and philosophical divide became clear during our weekly team meetings. Jessica would present sophisticated analyses of client behavior patterns and propose systematic approaches to relationship optimization. Her presentations were impressive, full of data visualization, trend analysis, and strategic recommendations that sounded both innovative and professional. But when I tried to explain why a particular client might need a different approach based on their history, personality, or specific business culture, my input was dismissed as anecdotal evidence that couldn't be scaled or systematized. The deep knowledge I had accumulated about individual clients was seen as inefficient specialization rather than valuable expertise. The breaking point came during a client crisis that perfectly illustrated the difference between our approaches. Westfield Industries was going through a merger with a larger manufacturing company, and their CEO, Michael Westfield, was deeply stressed about how the transition would affect his employees, company culture, and operational independence. This was exactly the kind of situation where relationships mattered most, where trust and understanding could make the difference between a successful transition and a corporate disaster. Michael had called me directly, which was our usual practice during sensitive situations. "Patricia, I need to talk through this merger situation," he said, his voice tight with stress. "There are aspects of this deal that I can't discuss in formal meetings, but I need someone who understands our business to help me think through the implications." I had been planning to take Michael to lunch to discuss his concerns in a relaxed setting where he could speak freely about his fears and priorities. Over the years, I had learned that Michael did his best thinking in informal environments where he didn't feel like he was performing for an audience. Some of our most productive strategy sessions had happened over coffee in his cluttered office or during walks around his manufacturing facility. But Marcus overruled my approach, insisting that Jessica handle the consultation through their new structured consultation protocol. This involved scheduling a formal presentation in our conference room, complete with slides about merger best practices, statistical analysis of successful transition strategies, and a standardized questionnaire designed to identify potential challenges and opportunities. The meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in our main conference room, with Jessica presenting and Marcus observing to evaluate the effectiveness of our new systematic approach. I was invited to attend as a subject matter expert, but was specifically instructed not to dominate the conversation with my relationship-based approach. The meeting was a disaster from the beginning. Michael arrived looking tired and frustrated, clearly dealing with the stress of managing a complex business transition while trying to protect his employees and preserve his company's culture. He sat stiffly at our polished conference table, surrounded by the formal atmosphere that Marcus preferred, but that made Michael visibly uncomfortable. Jessica began with a PowerPoint presentation about merger success factors that she had apparently prepared using generic business school templates and industry research. The slides were professional and well-designed, covering topics like cultural integration strategies, operational synergy optimization, and stakeholder communication protocols. But as she clicked through her presentation, I could see Michael's frustration growing. She was giving him generic advice from textbooks while he needed someone who understood his specific business challenges, his personal concerns about his employees, and the unique dynamics of his family-owned company being absorbed by a corporate giant. When Jessica started explaining statistical models for merger success rates, Michael interrupted with barely controlled impatience. "This is all very interesting," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled irritation. "But I need to know how this affects the quarterly reporting changes we discussed last month. I need to know if your team can handle the increased volume during the transition period. I need practical solutions for specific problems, not statistics about other companies' experiences." Jessica fumbled through her notes, clearly caught off guard by questions that weren't covered in her prepared presentation. She tried to relate his specific concerns to the general principles she had researched, but it was obvious that she didn't know enough about Westfield's actual operations, history, or culture to provide meaningful guidance. She didn't know that Michael's biggest fear wasn't financial loss, but the potential layoffs that might result from operational redundancies. She didn't understand that his company had a profit-sharing program that had kept his workforce loyal for decades, or that his employees viewed him as a protector rather than just a boss. She couldn't appreciate the emotional weight he felt as a third-generation owner who was potentially selling his family's legacy to preserve jobs and ensure the company's survival. After an awkward silence where Jessica clearly didn't know how to address his specific concerns, Michael turned to me with a look of desperation. "Patricia, can we talk privately?" Marcus started to object, clearly wanting to maintain control of the meeting and evaluate his new systematic approach. But Michael's expression made it clear that this wasn't a request. "5 minutes," he said firmly, and Marcus reluctantly left the room with Jessica. Once we were alone, Michael's frustration poured out. "What the hell was that?" he asked, his voice rising with exasperation. "I've been working with you for 6 years. I trust your judgment. I need someone who understands my business, my people, and what keeps me awake at night. I don't need some kid fresh out of school telling me about merger statistics I can find on Google in 5 minutes." I tried to explain the company's new approach while also addressing his immediate concerns, but Michael was clearly reconsidering his relationship with our firm. "Patricia, I called you because I need guidance from someone who knows my situation. I need to talk through the human aspects of this merger, how to protect my employees, how to maintain our culture, how to ensure that the acquiring company honors the commitments I've made to people who have worked for me for 20 years. I spent the next 20 minutes giving Michael the kind of consultation he actually needed. Practical advice based on my understanding of his business, specific suggestions for protecting his workforce during the transition, and strategies for maintaining his company's culture within a larger corporate structure. These were the kinds of insights that could only come from years of working together, understanding his values and priorities, and knowing the specific dynamics of his industry and company. When Marcus and Jessica returned, Michael was composed but firm. "I appreciate the research and analysis," he said diplomatically, "but I need to work with consultants who understand my specific situation. Patricia, I'll want to schedule follow-up meetings with you directly to work through the implementation details." The message was clear. He trusted me, but had no confidence in our new systematic approach. After Michael left, Marcus was obviously frustrated with what he saw as a failure of his new protocols. He blamed the result on Michael's resistance to innovation and my interference with the structured process. "This is exactly the problem," Marcus said, pacing around the conference room while Jessica looked uncomfortable and confused. "Clients get attached to individual consultants and resist improvements to our service delivery. We need to train them to work with our systems instead of accommodating their preferences for inefficient relationship-based approaches. I stared at him, realizing that he fundamentally misunderstood what had just happened. Michael wasn't resisting innovation. He was seeking the kind of personalized service that justified our premium rates. He wasn't attached to me out of sentiment. He trusted me because I had proven my value through years of successful collaboration. That conversation haunted me over the following days. I had spent years building trust with clients like Michael, understanding their businesses intimately, being available for their real concerns rather than just their surface-level problems. Now that approach was being systematically dismantled in favor of scalable solutions that felt impersonal and ineffective to the people we were supposed to be serving. I tried to explain this to Marcus during our next one-on-one meeting, but he dismissed my concerns as resistance to change. Growing pains, he called it, with the confident dismissal of someone who had never actually managed a long-term client relationship. Clients will adjust to our new systems once they see the improved efficiency and consistent service quality. But they weren't adjusting. The Morrison Group's CFO mentioned in passing that their calls were taking longer to resolve since they had to explain their background and context to new people each time instead of working with someone who already understood their business. 2 smaller clients didn't renew their contracts, citing changes in service quality and difficulty getting direct access to knowledgeable consultants. The personal touch that had kept our clients loyal for years was being replaced by automated efficiency, and it was driving them away. But when I tried to document these concerns, Marcus dismissed them as isolated incidents or examples of clients who weren't adapting to improved service delivery. The final insult came during the annual performance review season. Despite managing to retain our major clients in spite of the system changes, resolving the Westfield situation through personal intervention, and even bringing in 1 new account through a referral from a satisfied client, Marcus rated my performance as needs improvement. His written feedback was particularly cutting. Patricia demonstrates loyalty to outdated practices that limit growth potential. While her relationships with legacy clients provide short-term stability, her resistance to innovative approaches creates barriers to scalable expansion. Future development should focus on embracing data-driven methodologies and reducing dependency on personal relationship models that cannot be efficiently transferred or replicated. Sitting in my office reading those words, I felt something inside me break. 15 years of dedication, of putting the company's interests ahead of my own, of building the very relationships that kept us profitable during difficult periods, and this was how it was valued. I wasn't just being criticized for my methods. I was being told that my most significant contributions were actually problems to be solved. The review also included specific improvement targets that felt designed to force me out. Increase new client acquisition by 60% while reducing average client interaction time by 40%. Implement standardized service protocols that would eliminate personalized relationship management, and complete certification in 3 new software systems within 90 days. That night, I went home to my small apartment and tried to process what was happening. I had devoted the best years of my career to Henderson and Associates, turning down other opportunities because I believed in loyalty, because I thought dedication and consistent performance mattered. I had watched Emma grow from an 8-year-old dealing with her parents' divorce to a college sophomore studying business, and Henderson and Associates had been the stable foundation that allowed me to provide for her while building something meaningful. Now I was being told that loyalty doesn't pay, that everything I valued about my work was obsolete. The relationships I had built, the trust I had earned, the institutional knowledge I had accumulated, all of it was being dismissed as inefficient attachment to outdated practices. If you're following this story and wondering what happened next, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment with your city and country. I'm curious to see how far this story travels and connect with people who understand what it's like to have your values challenged in the workplace. I started updating my resume that weekend, something I hadn't done in over a decade. As I tried to articulate my accomplishments, I realized how much value I had actually created. The Morrison Group hadn't just stayed with us. They had expanded their contracts 3 times, referred 2 new clients, and consistently provided positive feedback that we used in our marketing materials. Westfield Industries had not only grown their own business through our guidance, but had recommended us to their industry contacts, resulting in relationships that generated hundreds of thousands in additional revenue. My relationship maintenance had actually generated more revenue than Marcus's metrics captured. But try explaining that to hiring managers who were looking for digital natives and innovative thinkers, code words for young and cheap that I was beginning to recognize in every job posting. The job market for someone my age was brutal and demoralizing. Companies wanted fresh graduates who could adapt quickly to new technologies, not experienced professionals who had proven their value through years of consistent performance. The few interviews I managed to get felt like exercises in proving I wasn't too old or set in my ways to learn new tricks. During one particularly humiliating interview at a competing consulting firm, a hiring manager who looked younger than my daughter asked me how I planned to stay relevant in an increasingly automated industry. The question felt like a personal attack on everything I had accomplished, as if my experience was a liability rather than an asset. Meanwhile, things at work continued to deteriorate. Marcus implemented a new system where client interactions were scored based on efficiency metrics that prioritized speed over quality. Phone calls over 10 minutes were flagged for review, with consultants required to explain why they couldn't resolve issues more quickly. Lunch meetings required pre-approval with documented objectives and post-meeting reports showing measurable outcomes. The spontaneous conversations that had made my clients feel valued were now categorized as wasted time. When David Morrison called just to chat about industry trends and get my perspective on market changes, I found myself cutting the conversation short and suggesting we schedule a formal consultation instead. The easy accessibility that had been one of our key differentiators was being eliminated in favor of structured interactions that felt more like customer service calls than strategic partnerships. Jessica was promoted to Senior Client Engagement Specialist, a newly created position that essentially gave her authority over my methods and approach. She was enthusiastic about implementing new systems and improving efficiency, but her lack of real-world experience showed in every client interaction. During one team meeting, she presented a detailed analysis of our client communication patterns and proposed new protocols that would standardize every type of interaction. She had charts showing optimal call lengths, preferred communication channels, and suggested response templates for common client concerns. The goal, she explained with the enthusiasm of someone who had never managed a real crisis, is to create consistent, high-quality experiences that don't depend on individual consultant knowledge or availability. Every client should receive the same level of service regardless of who they're working with. I wanted to explain that our clients didn't want the same level of service. They wanted personalized attention that recognized their unique challenges and priorities. But when I tried to share examples of how different clients had different needs and communication styles, Jessica dismissed my input as anecdotal evidence that couldn't be systematized. The situation reached a breaking point 6 months after my negative review. Marcus called an all-hands meeting to announce our new strategic direction, gathering the entire company in the main conference room for what felt more like a corporate takeover than a strategy update. The company was pivoting toward technology consulting, leveraging artificial intelligence and machine learning to provide predictive business analytics. He had partnered with a software development firm to create proprietary tools that would automate many of our traditional consulting functions. It sounded impressive and modern, but it was completely different from the personalized business consulting that had built our reputation. This transition will require all team members to embrace new skill sets and methodologies, Marcus announced from the front of the room, clicking through slides that showed revenue projections and market analysis. We'll be investing heavily in training programs to help everyone adapt to our evolved service model. Those who can successfully make this transition will find exciting opportunities for career growth. Those who cannot adapt may need to consider whether this new direction aligns with their professional goals. The message was clear: adapt or leave. After the meeting, he asked me to stay behind, and my stomach clenched as I realized what was coming. "Patricia, I want to be direct with you," Marcus began, settling back into his chair with the practiced calm of someone who had given this speech before. "This transition is going to require a fundamental shift in how we operate. I need team members who are excited about innovation, who can adapt quickly to new technologies and approaches, who see the future of consulting as data-driven and systematically scalable." I waited for him to continue, knowing that everything I said would be used to justify a decision he had already made. "I think it would be best for everyone if we explored other options for your career development," he said, using the corporate euphemism for firing someone that allowed him to avoid taking direct responsibility for his decision. "We can discuss a severance package that recognizes your years of service while allowing you to pursue opportunities that might be a better fit for your traditional approach." The word traditional stung like a slap. Everything I had built, everything I had contributed, reduced to a polite way of saying outdated and irrelevant. "Are you firing me?" I asked directly, tired of corporate doublespeak and euphemisms that obscured the reality of what was happening. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly preferring indirect communication that allowed him to avoid responsibility. "I'm suggesting a mutual separation that benefits both parties. Your methods have been valuable in the past, but they're not aligned with our future direction. I think you'd be happier somewhere that appreciates your interpersonal skills." The pause before interpersonal skills made it clear that he considered this a weakness rather than a strength, an outdated approach that had no place in his vision of modern consulting. I felt anger rising in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm and professional. "And my clients?" The Morrison Group specifically requested that I handle their transition planning for next quarter. "Westfield is in the middle of their merger consultation, and they've made it clear they want to work with me specifically." "Jessica and I will manage the transition," Marcus replied smoothly, as if transferring years of relationship building was simply a matter of updating client files. "We have systems in place to ensure continuity of service. Our new protocols will actually provide more comprehensive support than individual relationship management." Systems. Everything was about systems now, as if human relationships could be replaced by algorithms and automated responses. I looked at this man who had spent less than a year at the company, who had never spoken directly to our major clients, who saw everything through spreadsheets and metrics, and I realized that arguing was pointless. He had already decided that my approach was obsolete, that my relationships were inefficient, that my experience was a liability rather than an asset. No amount of evidence about client satisfaction or revenue generation would change his mind because he fundamentally didn't value what I offered. "I'll need to think about your offer," I said, standing to leave and maintaining what dignity I could in a situation designed to humiliate me. "Of course," Marcus replied, already turning back to his computer as if I had ceased to exist. "Take your time, but let's plan to have this resolved within the week." I walked back to my office in a daze. 15 years of work reduced to a problem to be resolved within the week. I sat at my desk, looking at the photos of company events, the thank you cards from clients, the small mementos that marked years of dedication and achievement. All of it suddenly felt like evidence of my own naivety for believing that loyalty and relationships mattered in a world that only valued efficiency and scalability. That afternoon, I started cleaning out my desk, not because I had accepted his offer, but because I needed to understand what I was walking away from. In the bottom drawer, I found a folder of letters from clients over the years. Thank you notes for handling their crises, recommendations for colleagues, invitations to company events, and personal celebrations. These weren't just business relationships, they were genuine connections built on trust and mutual respect. As I read through them, I felt my anger transform into something else: clarity. Marcus was wrong about loyalty not paying. These relationships had value that couldn't be measured in quarterly metrics. The question was whether that value could exist somewhere else, somewhere it would be appreciated rather than dismissed as inefficiency. One letter in particular caught my attention. It was from Michael Westfield, written 3 years ago after I had helped his company navigate a particularly difficult regulatory challenge. "Patricia," it read, "I want you to know that your guidance during this crisis went far beyond what we contracted for. You didn't just provide solutions, you provided peace of mind during one of the most stressful periods in my company's history. That kind of partnership is rare in business today, and we're grateful to have found it with you. I spent the weekend researching our competitors, particularly the smaller firms that still emphasized personal service over automated solutions. What I found surprised me. Several of our former clients had moved to boutique consulting firms after becoming frustrated with the industry's push toward impersonal, technology-driven approaches. There was actually a growing market for the kind of relationship-based consulting that Marcus considered obsolete. The more I researched, the more I realized that Marcus's approach wasn't just wrong for me. It might be wrong for the industry itself. Many successful consulting firms were built on exactly the kind of personal relationships and deep client knowledge that he was trying to eliminate. The technology was useful as a tool, but it couldn't replace the human understanding that came from years of working with specific clients. Monday morning, I made a decision that surprised even me. Instead of accepting Marcus's severance package, I submitted my formal resignation with 4 weeks' notice. I also did something else that felt both terrifying and liberating. I reached out to Michael Westfield, the Morrison Group's CFO, and 2 other long-term clients to inform them personally that I would be leaving the company. I was careful to follow all legal requirements about non-solicitation and client ownership, but I felt they deserved to know about the change from me rather than learning about it secondhand or through an impersonal company announcement. These were people I had worked with for years. They had trusted me with their most sensitive business challenges, and they deserved better than a form letter explaining my departure. The conversations were revealing and encouraging. Michael immediately asked if he could follow me to wherever I went next. "Patricia, you've been handling our account for 6 years. You know our business better than anyone on our own team. You understand our culture, our challenges, our goals. If you're leaving Henderson & Associates, we need to know where you're going because we want to continue working with you." The CFO from Morrison Group had a similar reaction when I called to inform him of my decision. "Are you starting your own firm?" "Because I have to tell you, we've been frustrated with the changes over there. Everything takes longer now. We can't get straight answers about our specific needs, and frankly, we've been wondering if it's time to look at other options anyway." It hadn't occurred to me to start my own business, but their responses made me realize that the relationships I had built weren't just valuable to Henderson & Associates, they were portable. The trust and understanding I had developed with these clients belonged to me, not to the company. They had chosen to work with me specifically, not just with the firm I happened to represent. That realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. At 52, with a mortgage and financial responsibilities that included helping Emma with college expenses, the idea of starting my own consulting firm felt impossibly risky. I had never been an entrepreneur. I had always been someone who worked within established systems, who built relationships and provided value, but let others handle the business development and financial management. But the alternative was accepting that everything I valued about my career was worthless, and I wasn't ready to do that. If Marcus was right that my approach was outdated, then why were clients specifically asking to continue working with me? If relationships didn't matter, why were long-term clients expressing frustration with the new systematic approaches? I spent my 4-week notice period carefully transitioning my clients to Jessica and observing how the new systems worked in practice. It was educational and deeply depressing. The Morrison Group's quarterly transition planning meeting, which I had been handling for 3 years, was turned into a generic presentation about change management best practices that could have applied to any company in any industry. Jessica had prepared slides about statistical models for organizational change, theoretical frameworks for employee adaptation, and standardized protocols for managing transitions. It was professionally presented and academically sound, but it completely missed the specific concerns and cultural dynamics that made Morrison Group unique. She didn't know that their CEO was particularly worried about maintaining morale in their Denver office, which had been struggling with retention issues. She didn't understand that their CFO needed specific data about cash flow impacts during transition periods because of previous experiences with seasonal fluctuations. She wasn't aware that their operations manager had concerns about employee reactions to change because of a failed automation initiative 2 years earlier that had created lasting trust issues. The meeting ran 40 minutes over schedule because Jessica had to keep stopping to ask clarifying questions that I could have answered before she started. The Morrison team left, looking frustrated and confused, and their CEO pulled me aside afterward with visible irritation. "Patricia, this isn't working," he said quietly, glancing around to make sure we wouldn't be overheard. "I need someone who understands our business, our people, our specific challenges. I need someone who knows our history and can build on what we've learned together." This felt like listening to a textbook chapter about change management, not getting guidance for our actual situation. I explained that I was exploring other opportunities, and he immediately asked for my contact information. "When you land somewhere, call me immediately. We're not happy with how things are going here, and frankly, we're starting to question whether Henderson & Associates is still the right fit for our needs." Similar conversations happened with other clients throughout my final weeks. They weren't just frustrated with the personnel changes, they were questioning the entire direction of the company. The automated systems that Marcus was so proud of felt impersonal and inefficient to clients who were used to direct access and customized solutions. David Morrison expressed his concerns more directly during our final official meeting. "I have to ask, Patricia, is this new approach working for anyone? Because from our perspective, everything is taking longer, costing more, and producing less useful results. We're paying premium rates for what feels like generic service." I tried to remain diplomatically neutral, but his question highlighted the fundamental disconnect between Marcus's efficiency metrics and actual client satisfaction. The systems that looked impressive on paper were creating frustration and inefficiency in real-world applications. My last day at Henderson & Associates was surreal and anticlimactic. There was no farewell party, no recognition of my 15 years of service, no acknowledgement of the relationships I had built or the revenue I had generated. Marcus was in meetings all day, probably planning the next phase of his systematic transformation. Jessica was busy trying to manage client issues that she was still learning to handle, dealing with the learning curve that comes with inheriting complex relationships without the context that made them work. I cleaned out the last of my personal items, turned in my key card and company laptop, and walked out of the building feeling like I was leaving a part of my life behind. But I wasn't walking into unemployment or an uncertain future. During my final week, I had filed paperwork to start Patricia Westfield Consulting Services, named after the first client who had expressed faith in my independent abilities. I had set up a home office in my spare bedroom, created a basic website using templates and online tools, and reached out to my network of professional contacts to inform them about my new venture. It was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time, the first purely independent decision I had made in my professional life. The real test came when I started making calls to former clients. I was scrupulously careful to follow all legal requirements about non-solicitation and client ownership, but I wanted them to know that I was available if they needed consulting services that weren't being met elsewhere. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within 2 weeks, I had signed contracts with 4 former clients, including the Morrison Group and Westfield Industries. They weren't just hiring me for specific projects. They were asking me to be their primary business consultant, essentially recreating the role I had played at Henderson & Associates, but with the flexibility to focus entirely on their needs without corporate bureaucracy. Michael Westfield explained his decision simply during our first official meeting as independent consultant and client. "Patricia, I don't want to work with a company where I'm just another account number in someone's CRM system. I want to work with someone who knows my business, who I can call when I have a problem, who understands what keeps me up at night, and can help me think through solutions." That personal understanding and accessibility is worth more than all the fancy software and automated systems in the world. Within a month, I was earning more than my corporate salary while working with clients who genuinely valued my approach. The relationship maintenance that Marcus had criticized as inefficient was actually my greatest asset as an independent consultant. Clients were willing to pay premium rates for someone who understood their specific challenges and could provide personalized solutions. The irony wasn't lost on me. Marcus had been right that loyalty doesn't pay, at least not in a corporate environment that doesn't value it. But he had been completely wrong about the value of relationships. They did pay, just not in ways that showed up on his quarterly spreadsheets or efficiency metrics. 3 months after leaving Henderson and Associates, I got a call from Paul Henderson, the founder's son, who had been pushed out when Marcus was brought in. He had heard about my new business through mutual contacts and wanted to meet for coffee to discuss potential collaboration. "Patricia, I owe you an apology," he said, as we sat in a downtown cafe that had become my unofficial office for client meetings. "I should have fought harder against the board's decision to bring in Marcus. I knew he would change everything that made our company special, but I thought the family name and history would protect our values." I had always respected Paul, and his apology meant more than he probably realized. He had genuinely cared about the company culture his father had built, but he had been overwhelmed by board pressure and market changes that seemed to demand a more systematic approach. The company needed to evolve, I said diplomatically, not wanting to criticize his decisions or make him feel worse about a difficult situation. I just wasn't the right fit for the new direction Marcus wanted to pursue. Paul shook his head with visible frustration. "That's the problem. The direction was wrong. We built that company on relationships, on trust, on understanding our clients' needs better than anyone else. Marcus turned it into a technology company that happens to do consulting. He optimized the business right out of what made it valuable." He leaned forward, his expression serious and hopeful. "I'm starting a new firm. Small, focused on the kind of personal service that built my father's reputation. I want to offer you a partnership. Full partnership, not just employment. We could build something together that honors the values that got lost in all of Marcus's systematic optimization." The offer was tempting and flattering. Working with Paul would provide stability, resources, and the satisfaction of rebuilding something valuable that had been lost. But I had discovered something unexpected in my independence. I was actually good at running my own business. I enjoyed the flexibility, the direct client relationships, and the ability to make decisions based on what was best for my clients rather than what fit corporate systems. "Paul, I appreciate the offer more than you know," I said honestly. "But I think I'm better suited to running my own practice now. I've learned that I can provide the kind of personalized service our clients want without the overhead and constraints of a larger organization." He smiled and nodded with understanding. "I respect that decision. But if you ever want to collaborate on larger projects, or if you need office space for client meetings, or if you just want to work with people who understand what we're really selling, the door is always open." 6 months after leaving Henderson and Associates, I attended an industry conference where Marcus was giving a presentation about disruptive innovation in business consulting. He spoke enthusiastically about artificial intelligence, predictive analytics, and automated client management systems. The audience seemed impressed by his technological sophistication and ambitious growth projections. During the Q&A session, someone asked about client retention rates and satisfaction metrics. Marcus paused for just a moment too long before answering with statistics about portfolio optimization and strategic account management. He talked about improved efficiency metrics and systematized service delivery, but he didn't mention that Henderson and Associates had lost 3 major clients in the past quarter, including the Morrison Group and Westfield Industries. After his presentation, we ran into each other in the hallway. Marcus was polite, but clearly uncomfortable seeing me, probably wondering if I would say something about the clients he had lost or the problems with his systematic approach. "Patricia, I heard you started your own firm," he said, attempting casual conversation while obviously assessing whether I represented any kind of threat or embarrassment. "How's that working out for you?" "Very well, thank you," I replied honestly. "I'm working with clients who value the personal approach and relationship-based consulting." Marcus nodded, but I could see something in his eyes that looked like doubt. "Well, best of luck with that. The market is tough for smaller firms. It's hard to compete without the resources and systematic advantages that larger companies can provide." "It is challenging," I agreed diplomatically. "But there's still a place for consultants who prioritize relationships over systems, who know their clients well enough to provide truly customized solutions." As I walked away from that conversation, I realized that Marcus would probably never understand what he had lost when he decided that loyalty doesn't pay. He would continue optimizing metrics and implementing systems, wondering why his client retention numbers kept declining despite all his technological innovations and efficiency improvements. The truth was that loyalty does pay, but not always in the ways that corporate leaders expect or can easily measure. It pays in referrals from satisfied clients who trust you enough to recommend you to their colleagues. It pays in long-term relationships that generate steady revenue and reduce the cost of constantly acquiring new business. It pays in understanding that comes from years of genuine partnership, allowing you to anticipate needs and provide solutions that automated systems simply can't match. A year after leaving Henderson & Associates, my consulting practice had grown to 8 regular clients and a waiting list for new business. I had hired 2 associates, both experienced consultants who shared my philosophy about relationship-based service. We worked out of a small office downtown, nothing fancy, but our clients didn't seem to mind the lack of expensive technology or automated systems. The real vindication came when I received a call from Jessica Chen, the young consultant who had been positioned to replace me. She was frustrated and considering leaving Henderson & Associates, struggling with the same systemic problems that had driven me out. "Patricia, I need some advice," she said during our coffee meeting, looking tired and discouraged. "Nothing is working the way Marcus promised. Clients are constantly complaining about our service. They want to speak to someone who knows their history, but the system is set up to distribute calls to whoever is available. I spend half my time trying to figure out what previous consultants have done for each client, and the other half explaining to frustrated clients why I can't answer their questions without researching their files." I listened as she described the same problems I had predicted. The emphasis on efficiency had created inefficiency. The push for scalable solutions had resulted in generic responses that didn't address specific client needs. The technology that was supposed to improve service had created barriers between consultants and the people they were supposed to help. "The worst part," Jessica continued, "is that Marcus blames the clients for not adapting to our new systems. He says they're resistant to innovation and too attached to outdated relationship models. But they're not resistant to innovation. They're resistant to feeling like they don't matter as individuals." I gave Jessica what advice I could about managing difficult situations and maintaining professional relationships in a challenging environment. But I also suggested that she might be happier at a firm that valued the same things she did. She had the skills and intelligence to be an excellent consultant, but she needed an environment where building relationships was seen as an asset, not a liability. 2 months later, Jessica joined my firm as a senior associate. She brought fresh perspectives and technological skills that complemented my experience and relationships. Together, we created a consulting practice that combined the best of both approaches: deep personal relationships with clients, backed by modern tools and methodologies that enhanced rather than replaced human connection. Marcus had been wrong about loyalty not paying, but he had also been wrong about innovation and tradition being mutually exclusive. The most successful consulting relationships combined both, understanding clients deeply enough to anticipate their needs while having the tools and knowledge to provide sophisticated solutions that addressed modern business challenges. My business continued to grow, not through aggressive marketing or automated lead generation, but through referrals from satisfied clients who valued the personal attention they received. We weren't the biggest consulting firm in the city, and we probably never would be. But we were profitable, sustainable, and most importantly, we were doing work that mattered to people who appreciated our approach. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had stayed at Henderson & Associates, if I had tried harder to adapt to Marcus's vision of efficiency and automation. Would I have eventually learned to value metrics over relationships? Would I have become comfortable treating clients as data points rather than individuals with unique needs and concerns? I don't think so. The truth is that some people are wired to build relationships, to find satisfaction in understanding and helping others, to believe that trust and loyalty have value that can't be quantified in quarterly reports. Marcus was right that loyalty doesn't pay in corporate environments that don't value it, but he was wrong about loyalty having no value at all. The real lesson of my experience isn't about the superiority of old methods over new ones, or about the futility of fighting change in rapidly evolving industries. It's about understanding what you value, what you're good at, and where those qualities are appreciated. Sometimes loyalty pays exactly as much as it's worth, but only in places where it's valued. Looking back on that conversation where Marcus told me that loyalty doesn't pay, I realize he was revealing more about his values than mine. He saw loyalty as a weakness, a sentimental attachment that prevented optimal decision-making. I saw it as a strength, the foundation for trust and long-term success in relationships that matter. We were both right, in our own contexts. In his world of quarterly metrics and scalable systems, loyalty probably didn't pay. But in my world of personal relationships and customized solutions, loyalty was the currency that made everything else possible. Today, when I meet with new clients, I don't promise them the most cutting-edge technology or the most innovative methodologies. I promise them something that's become increasingly rare in business. Someone who will take the time to understand their specific needs, who will be available when they have concerns, who will treat their success as personally important. That promise has paid dividends in ways that Marcus's metrics could never capture. Not just in revenue or profit margins, but in the satisfaction of doing work that matters, with people who appreciate the value of genuine professional relationships built on mutual respect and trust. The final irony of my story is that by leaving a company where loyalty didn't pay, I found a career where it paid better than I ever imagined. Sometimes the best revenge against people who don't value what you offer is to find people who do, and to build something wonderful together based on the principles they dismissed as outdated. If you've made it this far in my story, thank you for listening. It means more than you know to share this experience with people who understand that some things, like loyalty, relationships, and treating people as individuals rather than numbers, still matter in our increasingly automated world. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you believe that the human touch still has value in business and in life. Sometimes the old ways aren't outdated. They're just waiting for the right environment to prove their worth again.